You know, when you're young and you're somewhat attractive, whether this attraction is expressed because of physical attributes or because of the way you express what lives inside you. And what lives inside you is a combination of your life experiences, social experiences, political experiences, as well as how everything is filtered through your temperament. You know, if my brother was to read a passage from Plato, he'd probably go to class and just speak the statement verbatim. I, on the other hand, have to create a story. He'd be done with the statement in 2 minutes, I'd be done in like 2 days. And so temperament is extremely important. Now, when you're young and attractive in whatever shape or form, attraction pulls people towards you. You know, it's like a magnet. It's like I am the magnet, and all the people in the classroom are like paper clips. And the paper clips who are closest to the magnet naturally gravitate towards the magnet without even knowing why or how. It just happens. It's like when you go to a party and there is someone out there, and for some strange reason, you just feel intimate with them, attracted to them. And little by little, your body just, your emotions and your mind just says, go, go. And before you know it, your shoulders are touching. Now, because attraction and because having a big audience who are attracted to you is so intoxicating on so many different levels, I think it was the last scene in the movie, The 8 Miles. I think when, 2 kids were in a rap competition. And so the first is the black kid who goes and raps and the audience cheers him. The next person is the white kid. And now the audience are just jumping up and down because apparently he's so good. And something happens to you when you have an audience that just stands up and applauds you. And it happens to be 30 or 40. If you happen to be like a, Eminem or a Snoop Dogg, you have hundreds of thousands. And then little by little, the element of greed enters. That you're no longer satisfied with 20 people or 30 people or 40 people. Now you want hundreds of people. And that also gives you the illusion that your value as a human being has increased. That if you only have 1 student, you're worth $2. If you have 10 students, you're worth 5. If you have like 50 students, you're worth $100, And so when I was younger and less grouchy and less forward, and most of my classes were nothing but just storytelling, whether it was Laney or elsewhere, my classes were always full, 60, 70, 80, 100 people. And once in a while, I would run into, my boss, and they would say, wow, we've heard ABCD from you. And you're young, and so the attraction does you wonders. Everything about you just elevates. That you feel as if you're the only person on campus who's really good at what they do, that students really like you. So when you're young, like anything else in life, you don't really much care about quality of your audience. It's like dating. You don't really care what their history is. You don't really care how often they break down because of their history. You don't really care if their temperament is introvert or extroverted. You just like the fact that they have nice hair, nice nose. You guys go out and you have a good time. You drink coffee, you have a good conversation, you make out, and you watch a movie, and it's just nice. And then as you get a little older, and just imagine that you sit in a coffee shop, and because you have some good looks, everyone in that shop looks at you, and again your value goes up. As you get a little older, and as biologically and psychologically, as you age, your tolerance for nonsense, hopefully, if you kind of allow the initiation into the various stages of life to happen to you naturally, and you embrace those stages, you realize that your capacity for nonsense decreases, And so if in your 20s you would date 50 people, for example, in a year, now in your 40s you only date 5. Then in your 50s you don't date anyone unless you find them really, really interesting, and not so much interesting physically, because you've been there, you've done that, you know that the shelf life of anyone who's attractive on the outside but ugly on the inside. And by ugly I mean they lack a good amount of substance that don't make life interesting. And so in your 50s or 60s or 70s, depending on how early in life you kind of enter into those stages, you kind of walk into this place called fasting or abstinence, that you say, I refuse to go out with anyone who lacks substance. And so you're okay with being by yourself, or you're okay with walking in the classroom or having just 2 students, because those 2 ask good questions, they pay attention well. It's nice to have a classroom filled with 60 or 70 students. It's really nice. And sometimes I envy certain schools or certain instructors where they can walk in the classroom and the stage is just, theirs, and there are hundreds of people sitting and waiting for them. But then you begin to ask, well, what's the quality of the students that you have? Do they have any substance? Their questions, and people can ask great questions, but it all depends on their relationship to the question that they ask. So if I was to give you an example, there have been people in this class who say things, and there's nothing wrong with the things that they say. It's nice. It kind of gives us a chance to talk about things for an hour and 15 minutes. And then there are those moments where someone says or asks a question, and they have this intimacy with the question. It seems like they've had these emotions inside them for some time. They've been going back and forth inside their own head to figure out how to best express the emotions that live inside them through language. And then they speak it. And then when you listen to their voice, when you pay attention to the body language, you realize that this is a question that means something to the questionnaire. And then the question kind of has a different value, and the response that you have to give to the question, changes a little bit. And then after a while, you sit back and you ask yourself, well, which is best? To have a classroom filled with 100 students who ask lousy questions or ask questions but they don't really understand, or to have a classroom filled with 10 students who are really interested, who are really curious, who feel the language that they use to express something that lives inside them. It's nice to have a big audience. It's also nice to have a small audience. It depends on the day. There are days you walk in the classroom and you don't really want things to be serious. It's too difficult, especially if you have to wing it. You have to be creative with ideas, because it does take a lot of effort. And so when you have a big audience and little substance in the audience, they have a tendency of just asking ridiculous questions. And you can laugh, you can have a good time, and you can kind of go back to all the books you have read. Yeah, Durkheim said this, and Berger said this, and Buddha said that, and before you know it, 2 hours have passed, and you haven't really said anything. It's been nothing but a bumper sticker class. So, it depends on so many different things. The other thing is, when you ask a question at the age of 17 or 18, I doubt very much you understand the depth of your question. It's like you at the age of 17 going out with someone who's 17 or 18, you're looking at them and saying, I love you. It's a great thing to say. You are in the cradle of inspiration, excitement. your body, mind, and soul have come together harmoniously, and this tripart of yours, body, mind, soul, is now connected to the body, mind, soul of this person you're with, and it's great. But someone who has somewhat of, some kind of maturity about them, some life experience, kind of looks back and says, well, it's great that these two 17-year-olds are in love and they express their love so passionately, but the truth is they lack so much understanding, so much experience, and it's a double-sided, kind of like a sword or a knife, where at one point you envy the fact that these two 17-year-olds are fully in love and are expressing their love so passionately. From a different perspective, you kind of laugh at them, and they look ridiculous and absurd and stupid, and so it's a little bit of both. Yeah. So, what is it, Abigail? No. The only person that should know your names are your parents. Anyone else with anything? Yeah, Tenzin.
So, what do you think about people they love when they are in like 1960s, 70s, and they get married around like 22,
Right.
23?
Well,
They hope each time, whatever.
a good amount of who you are and what you are depends on the times in which you live. In the 80s, the only thing I knew was gay or lesbian. That was common. Now you have gay, lesbian, and trans. Then you have gay, lesbian, trans, and bi. And little by little, as time passes, you keep adding things. In some ways, it's really good because people can be who they are and kind of express themselves very naturally and organically. From a different perspective, it just becomes very, very confusing. So when you talk about the 1960s, we're really talking about, though it was the hippie era and the freedom movement for various groups, it was less of a confusing time as it is today. Let me give you some examples. In the 1960s and 70s, because of the various movements, there was the Vietnam War, there was what was happening with Kennedy, there was what was happening with, women coming out, the African Americans now have a movement, the gay community have a movement. And so what happens is the idea of marriage began to change, that no one really has the right to own anyone. Marriage is this contract between two people where the man owns the woman or the woman owns the man, or parents own children, and that shouldn't be the case. Love is something that's given to us by God, and it's given to us freely, and it should be given away freely, so no one owns anything. Time passes, and around 1980 or so, this virus called AIDS enters society. Now, prior to this time, free love was everywhere. I don't mean everywhere, but people were experimenting with it. And all of a sudden, AIDS hit, and people get sick, and people begin to die. And all of a sudden, people begin to sit back and ask questions. Should we give love freely, especially when there is a good possibility that they can catch this virus and get really sick and then die? And all of a sudden, the definition of marriage and companionship and monogamy begins to change. That you shouldn't really exercise polygamy. You shouldn't just sleep around. You shouldn't just do free love. You want to give your love freely, but examine it. See if the person is healthy or not, And so in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, the definition of what it means to be a human being was different. The definition of what it means to be in a relationship was different. Your relationship with your parents were different. The way people would judge you was different, and the way you would feel when you were judged was different. Today, the story is very, very different. Nobody really cares how anybody looks at you. Nobody really cares what sort of a judgment they pass upon you, because you have no respect for anybody. You know, you're talking about a time where most people really didn't have their own private bedrooms. You know, you slept on the floor on a bed, 5 beds in a single room, and all of you slept in the same room. You know, the idea of privacy didn't exist. The idea of individual rights didn't exist as it does today. You know, so also the elements of shame was very, very, very pronounced in culture. So let me give you an example of what I mean by shame. When I first began teaching in the 80s, what would happen is you would ask people, how many of you smoke? Hands would not go up. Because at least where I was teaching, I don't know about Oakland, I wasn't here then. Because people looked at themselves differently. And they wanted to make sure that people in the class did not kind of look their way saying, man, that guy smokes and that guy watches porn and that guy drinks. Why would he do that, or she? Today, the story is very different. We don't really care how other people see you and how other people judge you. So when I ask how many of you smoke, every hand goes up. You know. And so divorce was a huge thing in, 50 years ago, 30 years ago. It's no longer the case today. There was a time where even if you didn't enjoy being with your spouse because you had children, the kids would just force you to stay glued to your companion and to your life. In sickness and in health, you would be there. The story is very different today. So, and that's one of the things about language, because there are no fixed definitions. As time passes and as society and time change, they impose different definitions to language, to words. So today it's, you're dealing with a wave of 70% divorce rate. You're dealing with a 60% depression. And I don't know if, one day you should experiment with this, you guys. When you look out and it's windy and it's strong winds, go out there and just imagine that you're going to be exempt from being pushed around by the wind. You're going to be exempt from feeling the freeze. And you'll come to realize, well, yes, you imagine that the wind is not going to have any impact on you, but you were wrong. The wind impacts you. And when you live in a wave of 70% divorce rate and 60% depression, mental illness of sorts, that's the wave that's coming at us. No one is exempt. So for those of you in this class who want to get married, there's a 70% chance that you will divorce. And it matters very little. What you think of yourself, what you think of your companion, and we've known this for a long, long time. The only thing that has protected people from kind of just walking away and just being complete idiots, whether in married relationships or otherwise, is that you had fears. You had fear of society, you had fear of your parents, you had fear of God, of people like me, your instructors. But when you remove that fear, it becomes a free-for-all. You come to class late, you leave early, you do assignments, you don't do assignments, you raise your hand, you say all these profanities. So after a while you realize, well, that's just the way things are. You live in trash. So, this is not a good way to start class. Abigail, anything? Sure.
Your assimilation.
I didn't assimilate.
Like a little bit.
No, zero. I mean, sure, yes. It's what they call the formative years, from the age 0 to 5, 6, 10. These are the times that create the most important history in your life. And that history just sustains you for the rest of your life. So if, for example, at the age of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, your parents divorce or you witness them fighting all the time, That is your foundation. You're going to choose people very much like your parents in your life. You're going to behave very much like your parents. I mean, that's just the way things are. And so you can make minor adjustments. And the way you make minor adjustments is you go seek therapy, you read some books on Freud and various other people. And so the moment you want to behave like your mom, you say, no, I don't want to do that. So you repress the emotion. It doesn't mean that you don't have those emotions. It means you can better manage them now. But the foundation is very much the same. You just put a barricade or a fence around it so it doesn't come out like a beast. So the first 10, 11 years of my life, I lived in Iran. And you have to know something about the Persian culture. It's not like here. Religion is extremely important. Family is extremely important. Your neighbors will spank you, hit you, slap you, kick you if you do anything wrong. We don't have, it's not like today where you have to put your kid to this class and this class and this class. The street was your class. You get done with school, you go out in the streets, you whistle, and 20 kids come out and you play soccer. Your parents don't have to look for you. They, in fact, never do. As a kid, you never have money. You just go to the shop and say, I belong to Mr. Sabzavari, my father. When he comes back, he'll pay you. And that's how we survived. If you want bread, you stand in line for 5 hours. If you want meat, you stand in line for 10 hours. If you want whatever it is, everything is tough. Despite the fact that we have one of the biggest oil reserves on the face of this planet, if you want to put some gas in your car, you have to wait in line for 5 hours. These are things you see. And then you also have, social stuff. People suffer. People are poor. There is uprising every few minutes. You go to mosque every day and people talk about social issues, political issues. You only have 2 TV channels and they're both about politics and religion. Everywhere you go is about politics and religion. So when you grow up in this environment, you become like Will Smith. You can never forget your past. You can be rich, you can live in Bel Air, but the truth is that you came from a place that was rough. You will never forget that. That becomes a foundation of who and what you are. So I've been here for about 40 years. I don't have any American friends. Not one. I have acquaintances. They come to my house. We have conversations. Do you know what the word appropriation means? Okay, so imagine if I was to walk to class with my pants here. Okay, now I'm from Iran, and we don't have such style back home. But because I've come here and because I see people's pants down to their knee, I say, wow, that looks great. I want to be like that. And even though I come from a different culture that doesn't know this stuff at all, I begin to dress like the way young people dress here. That's called appropriation. Now, when you ask me, have I assimilated, what you're saying really is, have you appropriated anything from the Western culture, inserted that stuff inside you, and have those stuff changed the way you are, your identity? My answer to you is no. Maybe 1 or 2%, and I'll tell you why. When you take, every culture has 2 categories of stuff. It has trash and it has things that are valuable. Imagine you go home today and your door has been broken into. And you go and look into your closet and you realize all the old shoes that you stored in your closet, they're no longer any good. They have 0 value. They've been stolen. And then you look at this left side and you realize that all the brand new shoes in boxes, each worth like $200, $300, $400, they've been left alone. And then you say, how stupid is that? Someone goes to the trouble of breaking into my place and have all these valuable things, and they take trash. Every group of people, every country, every culture, every tradition, they have trash They also have things that are like gem, diamond. Have I taken the good things from the American culture? Absolutely. And you know what I've done with the things I've stolen from the American culture? I've made them Persian. You see my language? My language has been seasoned by Persian culture. I speak English, but I have Persian emotions in them. I have Persian culture in them. I have Persian poetry in them. I have Persian literature in there. I have Persian social and political components in them. That's why you're attracted to it. I also season it with my temperament. I'm not interested in trash. It doesn't move me. When someone walks to the class with their pants to their knees, it doesn't interest me. When someone uses bad language, it doesn't interest me. When someone says, well, every opinion is just as good as every other opinion, that doesn't interest me. That's just trash. The idea of diversity, it's really, really good as long as the things that you're bringing together creates harmony, like a symphony.
A lot of the American too much like they like to cheat. Do you think that's true? Is that why you don't have like friends?
No. Tenzin doesn't have any friends who are Americans. No, he doesn't. He has acquaintances. Look.
Oh yeah.
No, you don't need to ask him. I'll speak for him. You don't need to ask him. Because when you ask him, you put him on the spot, and he may feel embarrassed by saying, I don't have any American friends, because then you may interpret that as saying he doesn't like Americans. That's not true. Look, Tenzin or myself come from a culture that's Macintosh or Apple. Okay? Your culture is PC. These two programs don't mesh well. He doesn't drink. He's a Buddhist. He has a very, very close-knit family ties. He is very closely connected to his culture, tradition, and the rituals that they have to do every single day. When he makes money, 80% of it goes to his parents. He's not going to leave his parents unless for school or getting married. He's going to stay with them. That's one of the things you need to understand when people come from rich cultures. And by rich, I mean cultures that have been around for a long time, like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10,000 years old. The culture just is inside you. You know, American culture is about 275, maybe 300 years old. It's an infant. And what do infants do? Infants experiment with things. We don't experiment. Because just in case you experiment, something goes wrong, you shame your parents. You shame yourself. When you talk about the American culture and the American people, remember that America is young, which makes American people young, which means that American people have young psyches. They are in the business of experimenting with things. Why? Well, you can build. Look. If you have been in a relationship for 2 years, you love your companion. It's great. But if you've been in a relationship with someone for 50 years, what you have in the 2-year relationship that you've built with someone, you have, let's say, 2,000 stories. Places you've gone, things you talked about, things you've done with one another. It's great. And this 2,000 stories, they keep your relationship intact until you realize that as time passes, Of the 2,000 meaningful stories, now you only have 1,000 meaningful stories, which means that there is a part of your relationship that becomes not so valuable anymore. It's cracked now. Time passes some more. Of the 1,000 meaningful stories that the two of you have created together, now you have 50. And as time goes on, there is 0. You're just putting up with the other person. And after a while, you go your way and he goes his way. When you have been with someone for 50 years, good or bad matters very little. You have about 1,000,000 stories. The other thing you need to understand about culture such as his, they don't get married because of love. They get married because of tradition. That's what you do. Love doesn't exist for people like him. You think that he can go home, tell his mom, Mom, I'm in love with Joanna, I'm going to marry Joanna? You know what his dad is going to do to him? He's going to belt him, kick his ass. He's going to send him back to Nepal or India or Sri Lanka or China.